I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along. We're proud to expand this conversation. The beautiful thing is that we're reaching you on YouTube. If you're seeing it on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel and share it with friends, people that you have contact with. And you may be watching on Facebook Live. You're at the Insight News or Al McFarlane Facebook channel. Like it and share it. We want to grow this conversation, this movement, and get people to engage on critical issues of the day. Finally, we thank our association, our affiliation with the National Newspaper Publishers Association, NNPA, the Black Press of America. We're streaming this conversation and everyday conversations to blackpressusa.nnpa. So we're expanding the audience. We hope that in time we'll be bringing some of our colleagues, our fellow publishers, into the show and together examine issues that we note of interest in our own neighborhoods, our own communities, common problems and common solutions. Well, let me begin with Burnell Venable Powell. Dean Powell, former dean, retired dean of University of South Carolina Law School, former dean of the law school at the University of Missouri at Kansas City. And I think you taught at UN North Carolina, I believe. And I always refer to you, Burnell, as a Harvard lawyer. Burnell is the first cousin of mine, so I tell people that we've known each other since before we were born, and it's such a pleasure to be able to spend this time in both retrospection, but also examining, looking at issues of today. And then I want to introduce my friend and colleague, Yusef Mjini, who I call one of the great communicators, one of the pioneers in Black media, Black communication, and also in education, civic engagement here in Twin Cities. He's part of a legacy family, I think at least a couple of generations or more deep here in the Twin Cities. So he's got a vested interest in this community, but a vision of the world. Before we came on, Yusef, I had described you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I told Burnell that Yusef, I would call him a Pan-Africanist. That might be the wrong label to put on you.
Not
but
at all.
I also said he's probably what I would call a conservative, a Black conservative, not in the context of Republicans and Democrats, but of traditional moral values. He's a family man. He's a community man. I'd call him a race man, but not limited to that, because the race he represents is the human race. And I think he excels in presenting solutions, strategies, perspectives that reflect our common humanity. So with that, let's begin.
Yeah, I've been with the same Black woman for 52 years, Al, and you and Bobby have been together for how long?
About the same,
About
a few years after you, yeah. You put me on the spot, man.
Well,
about the same. We got married after you guys did, but it's been a while. It's been a minute.
I have to jump in with a couple of footnotes then. First of all, my wife, recently deceased, was with me, or I should say, we were together. She tolerated me for 45 years.
There you go.
And another 5 years before that. So I guess we're all family people. The other thing I need to know is that while I'm always proud to be referred to as a Harvard man, my first love and first law degree is from the University of Wisconsin. Now, I know they don't praise Badgers there in Minnesota, but bear with me.
We're neighbors. We're neighbors. Yeah.
Well, Burnell, I wanted to start off by, again, just sort of recapping and getting your impressions on the after thoughts and conversations behind the Derek Chauvin trial. A couple of weeks out now, and lining up to go into the trials of the other defendants in the case of the murder of George Floyd, and impressions on the outcome of the trial so far, the potential for appeals, and public sentiment as you are weighing it and seeing it around the world. And after you do that, Yusef, I want you to weigh in from a communicator's point of view on what people are saying, feeling, and how we're arguing. How have our interests been met? Are they being met? Brother Brunel?
I'm going to hold off on the question of whether our interests are being met. And by that, I assume that you mean, is the larger African American community being appreciated here and considered as full and active human beings in all this discussion? I think that things are still out on that. It's going to take some time to make that full assessment. But as we are in the immediate afterglow, as it were, I think that things look positive. The conviction that most of us expected has taken place. And while we are in a situation in which the normal appeals and motions for reconsideration to overturn the initial verdict are underway, I don't think that there's a great chance that they will be successful. There is always some chance. That's what the legal process is all about: exploring all chances, exploring all points of view, weighing them, and then giving them their appropriate due. But I would say that the chances are relatively slight that this verdict is going to be overturned. And then it seems to me that the next big question is what will be the reverberations of this case? And of course, the first level of consideration will be what will happen with the co-defendants, or I guess technically they're not co-defendants, but the other defendants in this case. And I think that the chances that they're going to be convicted are really quite high. There's a chance, too, that at least one of them might end up with, let's say, something less than all charges being found against them. And the reason I say that is that at least one of the individuals was a total novice. In fact, they were Chauvin's trainee, as it were.
Two of them, in fact, Barnable.
Two? Okay.
Two of them had only been on the force for 4 hours.
Okay. Well, they have a chance to raise that. And it may very well be that while as a technical matter, once they took the oath, they were fully responsible and they would not have been police officers carrying out their duties unless they were fully capable of acting as police officers. Juries in these situations try to do rough justice while they are doling out justice. And in that circumstance, I could see that they might favor the lesser charge, whatever that happens to be.
What do you sense is the feeling in the community about the range of possibilities? Do you think there is a forgiving or an understanding in the community that accommodates that explanation as a reason for mitigation or for reducing the sense of culpability or charge against at least those two newer officers?
I'm always leery when I have to generalize from one case, and particularly when I have to generalize from one case and I'm the one case. My sense is that these young officers who had not been fully schooled, while they may be totally guilty in a technical sense, in a moral sense, I still have some concern about whether the full weight of the law should be brought to bear on them, in the sense that the strongest sentencing should occur for them. I do believe, however, that they should be found guilty of some charge, and then I think that it's up to the judge in imposing the sentence to weigh the other factors. But that's what I think. The jury might see it differently and might think, well, we need to impose the lightest sentence possible because we think that we're concerned with what's going to happen with these individuals.
Yusuf, what are your thoughts in terms of how our communities have responded, and how you, as a communicator and observer, sort of watched the proceedings that led to the conviction, the guilty verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial?
Well, Al, first of all, let me thank you for the invitation to share some thoughts with you on your program. I am not a lawyer, but I want to support every one of Burnell's observations. You and I are trained professional observers. Let me share some of my observations. Number one, the community was outraged at the cavalier attitude in which Officer Chauvin, for 17 minutes, kept his knee on the back of George Floyd's neck, okay, like he was on a coffee break or something. And when George Floyd repeatedly said that he couldn't breathe and was calling for his mama and said he was dying, Chauvin said, "Shut up, boy. You know, if you can talk, you can breathe." And the Asian cop was moving his body, trying to block the 17-year-old sister from filming on her telephone what the cop was doing. And the dispatcher, okay, in the 911 office called her supervisor and reported a murder because she said there's a cop murdering a civilian with his knee on his neck. A Minneapolis firefighter, I think the woman's name was Geraldine, went to the scene by accident and said, "Look, I'm an emergency medical technician. Check the man's pulse. Can I help?" And the Asian cop said, "Look, if you were really a firefighter, you wouldn't be getting involved in this. You know, you'd mind your own business and get out of here." And the one policeman, the white policeman, whose name was Lane, said, "Look, shouldn't we turn this man over on his side? He's unconscious. He's having trouble breathing. Blood was running from his nose. His bladder had released and urine was running down the street toward the spectators." And another officer told me that Chauvin had his hand in his pocket or on his thigh because in the warrior training that some officers take, when they press their hand against their thigh, it allows them to put twice as much pressure, twice their weight on the victim's neck, okay? And again, man looked like he was on a coffee break, you know, like he was out having a smoke out in the back alley or something, just as nonchalant as you could ever picture anyone. And the penalty for the crimes for which he was committed are 12% on the low end and 40 years, 12 years on the bottom, 40 years on the top. And the judge has said that because there were children as young as 7, 8, 9 years old, and the manner in which Chauvin conducted himself, that this was cruel and unusual punishment. So there's a good likelihood that the judge would depart upward in terms of the sentence that he would impose. And while the lawyers that I've talked to don't believe he would go all the way up to 40, they believe he might depart somewhere in the middle between 12 and 40. And the other cop, King, is actually from the north side. He's a brother. And Chauvin was the training officer on site, and King and Lane were the two trainees who had only been on the force for 4 hours when this happened. Now, the Justice Department has brought civil rights charges against all four of the officers, murder charges. So that will supersede the local charges, and all of those have been stayed while the federal charges proceed. So they'll be tried and charged by the Justice Department, and the local state charges will have to wait until, they could get life in prison if they're found guilty of the Justice Department charges, and those will supersede and take precedent over the state charges that were brought against them. And hooray for Brother Keith Ellison, who you and I and others have served as a mentor for since he came here from Detroit as a law student at the University of Minnesota some 20, 30 years ago, who is now the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota, was the first Muslim congressman elected to the United States House of Representatives for his role as the Attorney General in bringing and taking over for Mike Freeman, the Hennepin County Attorney, and putting a team together, and for Jerry Blackwell, who said of George Chauvin, the man didn't let up, the man didn't get up. Let's bring the maximum that we think we can enforce. Because remember, when Philando Castile was charged with first-degree murder, the standard was much higher, and he was
when he was killed, not when he was charged. You mean when the officer who killed Philando?
Yeah, he was acquitted because they couldn't meet the standard of first-degree murder. When Noor, the Somali cop, was accused of killing the Australian Caucasian woman in South Minneapolis, they brought second or third-degree murder, and they were able to withstand the same charge that they brought against Chauvin, and they were also able to get a conviction in that case because it's a lower standard. And I think he got, 12 years in prison or something like that. The other piece is that the $27 million settlement that was awarded before the Chauvin trial even began, many people in the community viewed that as riot insurance. Please don't light the entire city of Minneapolis on fire. We're going to give this family $27 million. And they gave, the Philando Castile family quite a bit of money even after the cop that shot him, who incidentally is a police officer in San Antonio, Texas, on the police force down there today. And during the Chauvin trial, Dwante White was killed in Brooklyn Center, which is a suburb immediately adjacent on the north side of Minneapolis. What wasn't reported is that while he was scuffling with the police, a white cop reached in and punched his girlfriend in the face and broke her jaw. She was sitting in the front seat of his car. And since the George Floyd trial has ended, 8 or 10 unarmed black men have been killed by police in other various cities around the United States. So the George Floyd trial is the tip of the iceberg, okay? And it's good that we were able to hold Officer Chauvin, and by extension, the other 3 officers or 4 officers involved accountable. But that's not the kind of systemic improvement. We want the best trained police officers possible. We want, well-trained, culturally proficient, respectful, knowledgeable police who live in, respect, and work well with our community. We don't want thugs who are on the loose, who are, out there in air-conditioned command posts, riding herd over children and senior citizens and treating people in our community like animals. Because the way you see people is the way you treat them, and the way you treat them is the way they act. And we can't afford that. We don't want that. And our community is not going to stand for it. So this is not justice. This is just accountability in the case of George Floyd and his family. And we've still got Dwante Wright and dozens of other cases around the country, and hundreds that preceded it where justice was not achieved. And whether we get, look at what did the Minnesota legislature do in the special session that they had? Virtually nothing. That popcorn powder puff legislation that they passed, does very little. Our post peace officer standards and training has done virtually nothing. Our Republican controlled legislature, look at what the legislatures around the country have done in terms of voter suppression, in terms of protection for the police, so they bar chokeholds, they do two or three other little things, but they've still been very law enforcement friendly and very anti, public. And so when we say defund the police, we don't mean get rid of them. We don't mean take all the money away. We mean let's hold them accountable. Let's be more efficient and judicious in terms of how we allocate it and in terms of how we apply resources toward public safety, mental health, and other issues related to lower minor crimes in our community. So we got a long way to go.
Well, that was a wonderful omnibus analysis, right, and recounting of the experience we're having. Brother Brunel, jump in. What impressions and feedback?
Well, first of all, yourself has used the old lawyer technique of saying, I'm just a country lawyer. In terms of his reference to being a lawyer, it's pretty clear he has all the skills of a courtroom lawyer. Having said that, I can't really say that I'm conversant with yourself with your recounting of the comments that were made and the description of blood and et cetera that was going on at the scene and the actions of the participants, because some of that, it strikes me, was not in the record that was before us, and so I just don't have access to that information. But having said that, I'm completely comfortable with your bottom line, though. The call for transparency and officers who can work well in the community. The call for a re-examination of policing so that we are actually getting officers who are there to protect and to serve. And we are a long way from there, and I'm in agreement with the comment that we have accountability at this point in this one trial, yet we have not reached a point where we can say that we have justice. That's still down the line. The one thing that I would add is that the Justice Department has announced that it is going to engage in an oversight investigation, and I think that is sorely needed. There is a real need to come in and look at the practices of the police there in Minneapolis.
Absolutely.
And to see how they are operating, to look at prior cases, not just to focus on the Floyd case, but to put the Floyd case in the full context so that we can see what it is that has been going on and whether the patterns and practices that are in place today are the ones that we need going forward. I think we already know that they are not the procedures that we need going forward. We need a deeper look.
As an example, there have been 17 brutality or excessive force complaints brought against Officer Chauvin, and he has only received 2 verbal reprimands. He also has recently been involved in a case of a 14-year-old male who he choked and struck with his flashlight, who he then threw to the ground and placed his knee on his neck for 17 minutes. And that's a lawsuit that's recently been filed within the last 10 days or 2 weeks. So there are a lot of folks who are coming out of the woodwork and saying, this man has a history. And there was an officer, Al will remember, on the Minneapolis Police Department, whose nickname was Thumper. And he used to grab people by the ears and bang their face against parking meters. And the city council settled I think, $4 or $5 million worth of brutality or excessive force complaints just against him alone, and he was promoted to lieutenant before he retired.
Yes.
And Augsburg did a study that looked at brutality complaints against African Americans and American Indians and found that they were 7 to 9 times more likely than a white person of being pulled over, being searched, being, involved in excessive force or brutality. These studies have been taking place for years. And I live in St. Paul, which is the capital city and a neighbor of Minneapolis. And believe me, I tend to my P's and Q's when I go to Minneapolis because the police department over there has a history that some of us are very, very knowledgeable of.
Yes. One other thing that I would like to put on the table here is that when I hear the comment "defund the police," I think that that's a catchy slogan, and it really grabs the attention and focuses or forces some sort of a discussion. And I think it works from that standpoint. But I also think that statements that are made using the negative voice, defund, don't do this, stop that, always have less force than statements that are stated in the positive. And I think that the call would be better for the creation of a public safety and service institution.
It's a lot easier to tell people what you're against than it is to tell them what you're for.
That's right. But it's not impossible to tell people what you are for.
Well, that's what we have to do.
And I think that the investigation by the Justice Department will be a tiny initial first step in helping to explain what it is that we're for. But what it's going to take is continuous dialogue, such as what we are engaged in here, and what our listeners are engaged in. And as part of that, one of the things that I think that it's clear that we want is that when you pick up the phone, that's really old school. When you use your cell phone to call for assistance from the city or the county, what you are expecting are people who are going to show up, who have the understanding and the commitment to serve your need, and that they're not there to serve their need and to carry out some personal vendetta under the color of the power of the state. We don't need that.
Mm-hmm. Burnell, it's also tricky because in the 21st century, we got a lot of technology involved. We have body cameras. You have the expectation of privacy in your house. If your wife falls in the tub and breaks her leg and you call 911, the paramedics come, often the police come too. And if they have a body camera on, they're filming everything in your house. You have the right to ask them to turn the body camera off or to tell them that they're not welcome to come in your house. Mm-hmm. They're not required to tell you that they're filming everything in your house, including your nude wife, mm-hmm. And they can come to a Marcus Garvey or a Juneteenth parade and film everybody in the crowd and use facial recognition technology and pull people out who have expired parking tickets or warrants for not paying, fines or what have you. And, the darker you are, the more errors the facial recognition technology is involved in. And Hennepin County, which includes the city of Minneapolis, the sheriff's department is using facial recognition technology with their body cameras. And a lot of people don't even realize that.
Yes.
A national company that provides body camera coverage, storage for all the police departments, including Hennepin and Ramsey County, Minneapolis and St. Paul, has a national data bank that they use facial recognition technology for. And local law enforcement agencies are sending data or pictures and asking them to use the facial recognition technology to identify people from crowd photos, from individual photographs. And so there's a lot going on, and they're selling it to not just, Facebook is selling it to the military, the FBI, the NSA, Homeland Security. I mean, it's crazy the way that private information and all of your stuff is, if you're on Facebook, is going everywhere,
Well,
Well,
one
the
thing
great
you
thing
suffer,
about
Brunel, is that this technology is phenomenal, truly. And I always say that we have to remember that what's available in the marketplace is pretty much available to all. And it was, in fact, the access to the internet and Twitter and Facebook that allowed the young lady to share what was happening to George Floyd to the world.
Yeah.
And also Philando Castile's girlfriend
Sure.
shared that event as it was happening on social media to the world. So the question is, yes, the technology exists. Ought we be talking about how we as individuals, as community, as cultural groups are able to use that technology in our own defense or to protect and project our interests? And not in the sense of being, by definition, contrarian or adversarial to the national discussion, the national identity, but in the sense of ensuring that our viewpoint, our vision, and our sensibility, our dignity are genuinely embedded, implanted in what America and what community, what America is and what community is. How do we resolve that we too can enjoy, use, and
gain access to it
right.
when other people come in our community and capture it.
And so you mentioned that the officer that killed Philando Castile is now in San Antonio. I mean, just that information is new information to me, and it's a reflection of how we can use this technology to keep communities aware of who's doing what in our community, what their story is.
Yeah, he's on the police force there.
Well, and so at some point in time, remember when I think it was Lane or Keene, one of those guys was in Target, right? Just after George Floyd got
that was
killed. King. So a sister in the store said, "What? You're just here? And
what
so
are you doing here?"
She went live, showing him having a wonderful afternoon shopping at Target. Well, obviously he's got the right to live, and he has to live, has to do what people do, even though he's under charge right now, et cetera. But it just shows you the power and the use and potentially the abuse of the technology, but it's there to use. How do we train ourselves to be both principled, ethical, moral, but at the same time, therefore effective in using the technology to protect ourselves, project our interests in the spirit of ensuring that we are part of the table of decision in society and community. What are the ethical issues? Brunel Powell is an expert in ethics, and how do we use this technology in an ethical way and ensure that technology is not used in non-ethical ways to suppress or deprive us of our rights and our humanity? Brunel, what do you think?
Well, there are a couple of things. The first thing I would note in terms of a generalized ethical principle is that consent can only come with full information. One has to know fully what one is engaged in before you can be said to have given your consent to it. And so when Yusuf was speaking about cameras being brought into the home by the police and they're running and you're not aware of that. We have to have a system in which it is obligatory that when an officer comes into a private space with their cameras, they point that out. I'm here, my camera is running. We want the camera to be running, however, to the extent that some activity is going on that engages the police officer. But more than that, we want fair rules with respect to access to the video that camera is producing. The rule in North Carolina recently, where the family members were given 2-minute, 20-second snippets, maybe even a 20-minute snippet out of 2.5 hours of footage, is a rule that is wrong-headed. The presumption ought to be that if video exists, that video is public information and it is immediately available. And that if the police officers or the police department or the Attorney General's office does not want it to be disclosed, they should have to go into court and prove to a neutral a decision maker that some harm would arise if the video was released. Right now in North Carolina, the law is completely upside down, and it puts the burden on the public who own the information to prove that they should have access to it. It is a terrible rule, and it is the kind of thing that not only our community, but all communities in this nation ought to be upset about, and we ought to be zeroing in to make sure that that's not happening. The second thing that I would point out in terms of having access to information is that the rule ought to be that if you are a police officer engaged in an activity that involves the use of lethal force or even strong physical action, the expectation ought to be that your camera is going to be on. And if your camera is not on, you should not have access to the right to make any kind of claim that you are privileged as a police officer to engage in the activity that you engaged in. The notion ought to be that if your camera wasn't on, you lose any claim to privileges that you might otherwise have a right to.
Let me give you an example. In Minneapolis, the police officers are not allowed to look at the video or the audio until after they file their report or are interviewed. In St. Paul, they have the right to look at the video footage and listen to the audio before they fill out their report or do an interview. Yeah. And we believe that they're not going to put anything in the report that's not on the videotape, okay? And I didn't think that the Minneapolis department would ever be better than the St. Paul department in anything. But this is an example where in Minneapolis, you can take pride in what Arredondo did, because he changed that rule recently and said, you can go back and amend your report after you look at the video, but you're not going to look at that video. And some of the police in St. Paul said that if they couldn't look at the video before they filled out their report, they were going to put in the report, see video footage. You know, that was going to be their report. And you know, they ought to fill out the report first, and then they can look at the video, you know?
Yes. No one should have access to the video
prior to filling out the report.
Prior to the public having a right to that access.
And just as the officer has the right to the report, they ought to tell the people that they arrest that you have a right to look at the video before you make any statement or fill out any report. But they don't, you know, but the officers know that they have the right.
Well, I would agree with you that the officers should not have access to the video before filling out their report. And if the officer wants to take the position that that they will not respond or will not cooperate, they have that right. There is a long set of precedents that say that the state cannot force its employees to give up their rights. But those precedents also say that if you are not responding appropriately to the administrative demands that are being made on you as an employee, then the administrators have the right to treat you as someone who is not able to do their job, to do the job at the present time, and so they can suspend you. And if I have police officers working for me who were saying, see video, and I'm not going to discuss what happened, I would say, no, I don't want to know what happened from the video. What I want to know is what you think happened and why you think it happened in the way in which you described it. That's vital information for purposes of understanding this situation. And I think that is, quite frankly, the least of what we should expect as citizens.
I agree.
Let's talk about the landscape that we're in right now, given the George Floyd trial, or the Derek Chauvin trial for the murder, the trial coming up in the murder of or death of Dante Wright. And as you indicated, Youssef, more cases like this, more deaths of Black people at the hands of law enforcement becoming known, becoming public. Where do we go? Do we see the verdicts in the Derek Chauvin trial as instructive, or as setting a bar, a standard for what should happen differently in the courts? And the question is, we know that in the past, punishing a white person for killing a Black person, has been laughable to a certain degree in certain places. The Emmett Till and other cases like that in the South, where the foregone conclusion was that trying to try someone white in the death of a Black person was simply a charade. While on the other hand, without a real trial, Black people were consistently and regularly punished by death through lynching or through imprisonment. So that was the dynamic that we come out of. So with these changes, and Brunel, you've spoken to this before, are we to be hopeful that these verdicts are going to mean a different look at how justice is dispensed and how we can reduce that disparity in the experience that Black people have versus those experiences of white people? What do you think?
Well, Black people, people of color, as a group are hopeful. Indeed, historically have had to be hopeful in this country. So I certainly think that there is a reason to continue in that vein, to continue to be hopeful. But hope is not enough. That's not sufficient. That may be a starting point. But along with hope has to be a sense of insistence, that we insist that certain things happen. We insist on a regular way of handling these cases. We insist that like cases be treated in a like manner. We insist that decisions be made in an open, a transparent fashion. We insist that there be one standard, and that one standard be applied to all people all the time.
I think it's going to take Congress to deal with police reform legislation nationally, so that we do have that one standard. If we have to do it city by city and state by state, it's not going to happen in our lifetimes. We have Republican-controlled legislatures in most of the country. And, right now we have a Republican-controlled Senate. So I don't think it's a priority within the Biden administration. The Justice Department is doing audits in Minneapolis. The other one is in Louisville. And I think that's a shot across the bow of many police departments, but there are still individual rogue police officers in many police departments. And unless Congress acts on police immunity, on police reform, to create some base changes that apply across the board, I don't know that it's going to make a fundamental difference.
Well, I do agree with you that case by case is not going to resolve the problem, and that there has to be a national standard set. There are 15,000 police departments in this country, and trying to deal with each one on an individual basis is simply a task that is doomed to failure.
17,895 to be exact.
Okay. But the reason why we have a federal system, a federalized system of government, meaning a national government operating simultaneously with the individual state government, is so that national questions can be handled. And this is going to require resolution at the national level. It is going to be tough to get there, and it may mean that the filibuster is going to have to be done away with before we can get there. But at this point, we don't know what it's going to take. What we do know, however, is that it's going to require our perseverance and, again, our insistence.
I had an interview yesterday with some young people who are with a group called the Young People's Task Force, a division of the Unity Community Mediation Team, a group that's been in contact with the Justice Department in history around consent decrees held with the Minneapolis City and Police Department a dozen years ago. And after the George Floyd uprising, that group reconvened itself, seeking to reconnect with the Justice Department and somehow at least be part of the official dialogue in the work of the Justice Department investigation, and to continue its advocacy from the community point of view about protecting the interests, the rights of Black people and people of color in the criminal justice system. One of the young people said something that I thought was interesting. I'm not sure where he got it from, but I liked it, so I share it with you. And he was saying, we tolerate this idea, or we explained that there are just some bad cops, and that's kind of a cost of being human beings or society or whatever. He said, but we don't tolerate having bad pilots. Our sense of is it acceptable in any stretch of the imagination to have a bad pilot? Now, there may be some bad pilots, but our standards really address this question of whether or not it's excusable, allowable, tenable to have a bad pilot. In that vein, we have a policy that says no bad cops.
Or bad surgeons. Yeah.
Or bad surgeons, right? Yeah.
Yes. Your mention of the of pilots reminds me that the Federal Aviation Administration, excuse me, the FAA has an interesting policy when it comes to supervising, policing, as it were, the pilots administratively. They have a a system in place that says to the airlines, any infraction that takes place, you have a responsibility to self-report. And if you're self-reporting, we're not going to deal with you in a harsh manner. And I'm not getting into all the details, but the incentive is on airlines to be in the position of constantly reviewing what they are doing and reporting any errors that take place and creating a national record of these errors so that at the end of the day, you have volumes of information so that you can see what the operation of an airline looks like. We ought to be doing the same thing for police departments. We ought to be saying to police departments, we want a self-reporting system. Instead of telling us that you have a few bad cops, we want to know what those bad cops are doing and when they did it. And it's incumbent upon you to collect that information and on a regular basis, feed it into a national database so that we have a view of what policing really looks like.
And Brunel, that goes to a comment you made earlier that I appreciated so much. And you talked about what it means to be a professional organization and the role of ethics inside a professional organization. And you questioned whether or not the Minneapolis Police Department, I think by extension, you're questioning the police industry, whether and where it has adopted and demonstrated an ethical strategy that allows it to call itself a professional organization. Go over that again. I think it's so important.
Well, what I was referring to was the fact that from a historical standpoint, one of the first requirements of a professional organization was self-policing. We are professionals because we have standards. We articulate what those standards are, and to be a member of our society means that you have an obligation to report bad conduct. Now, my primary focus is legal ethics, and I can tell you that in every jurisdiction in the country, there is a requirement that when a lawyer becomes aware of some conduct which runs afoul the ethical standards of the profession, they have a duty to report it. Now, I am not saying that it is a foolproof system, but I am saying that over the years, the legal profession has gotten better at doing that. There was a time 30 years ago when the idea that lawyers were going to be sued for malpractice just wasn't wasn't taken seriously. Neither doctors nor lawyers would ever report on each other, and they would refuse to prosecute each other. They would refuse to be expert witnesses against each other. And what we saw was that when lawyers in particular insisted upon holding doctors accountable for malpractice, there was blowback. And some in the profession, including yours truly, then a young attorney, was saying, we can't ask other professions to engage in self-reporting and we not be prepared to do the same thing. The legal profession, lawyers have no room for bad lawyers. It does none of us any good. And today, I think that is overwhelmingly the view among lawyers. That's not saying that they're all brave enough to stand up and take the heat if it requires that you do the reporting. But there is no debating any longer about what ought to happen to bad lawyers. They ought to be kicked out of the legal profession. And the police are not there yet. Those 17,000 police departments can't say in unison, if you are a bad police officer, you should or you can expect that other police officers in your police force are going to report you, or going to insist that you have your rights to act as a police officer lifted here, and that you be prevented from acting as a police officer in other jurisdictions. If you are disbarred in Minnesota, a report goes to the National Disciplinary Data Bank, which is maintained by the American Bar Association, and that report puts or is available so that other jurisdictions will know that you were disciplined if you show up seeking to be a lawyer in those jurisdictions. That wasn't always the case, but today it is uniformly the case, and we need the same thing for police officers.
Listen, we're out of time. This has been a wonderful conversation. Yusuf, a final thought, final word?
3 books that I'd like to encourage some of your viewers to read. The first is The Blood of Emmett Till by Timothy Tyson. The second is Branded by Birth by Ibram X. Kendall. And the third is Caste, C-A-S-T-E, by Isabel Wilkerson. I guarantee you won't be able to put any of the 3 down.
All great books. Listen, Yusuf, will you come back again? This has been a delightful conversation. Burnell, hopefully you'll come back. We'll have Kamal King back with us next week, and also attorney from Minneapolis, Clinton Collins. And so our idea is just to have this kind of conversation and kick it back and forth. And I think just who we are is, and having this conversation brings value to us individually and to people who are listening or watching, who may read the reports of this conversation in Inside News and perhaps on the pages of the Black Press of America. So listen, thank you so much. Dean Emeritus Burnell Venable Powell, thank you so much. And my friend and colleague, Master Communicator Yusuf Mgini, thank you so much. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, brother.
Suffering and